ANC Deputy Secretary General Jessie Duarte has delivered a blistering critique of the governing party. This happening over the weekend. She was delivering the Albertina Sisulu Memorial Lecture in Soweto. That's where she reportedly accused the ANC of tribalism and of marginalising voters who are not black Africans. Pule Mabe is the party's national spokesperson and is my guest on Nightline tonight. Pule, very good evening to you. So is the ANC a tribalist and racist party that marginalises people who are not black Africans?
Well, evening to your viewers. I don't think that it's necessary to take what the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC said out of context. She was delivering a memorial lecture to honor Mayor Albertina Sisulu, and in talking about her, reflected on the need to work towards a united South Africa. Actually, one of the points she made was the solemn plea that we emerged with out of the 2012 Mangaung Conference, where we said that we must fight tribalism and make sure that it is extinguished completely from well within our ranks. So here is the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC who goes on to do what we are all expected to do: self-reflect, self-introspect, elevate and raise issues of concern and show what we need to do, and say to people that when you do not know certain things about what is happening in communities, for instance in Westbury, you know, don't speak as though you know, and then begin to say that areas that were previously classified as colored areas were privileged under apartheid when we have actually not been there. So she's actually putting questions to ourselves.
But the point she was making, was she making the point that the ANC has to an extent marginalized coloured leaders and coloured communities? Is that the point she was making?
Well, the point she was making is that there is a need in the ANC for all of us to coexist.
But I'm speaking to a comment about coloured communities in particular. Does she feel, your Deputy Secretary General, Jessie Duarte, does she feel that the ANC has perhaps ignored? In fact, I want to read a quote for you, because she says here in an IOL article, and I quote, "We have almost become tribalist in the way we present ourselves.
Correct.
We are racist in the ANC because we marginalize people who are not black African people. Keep them out of the ANC at all costs. Put one or two there as tokens so that we can say, Maraya, you know, there's Jessie Apa representing." Which part of that quote is inaccurate?
Well, the Deputy Secretary General, as part of the self-introspection and the self-reflection that I'm talking about, raises these issues, places them on the national agenda, so that we can begin saying, our policies as the African National Congress sufficiently responsive to allow us to deal with the challenges of the day. Now, it is only the ANC is the only organization in this country that has got leaders who are able to do that. We are able to self-reflect. We are able to self-introspect. We are also able to be critical of ourselves and then say, what is it that we need to be doing so that the South Africa that we want and wish for could be able to be born out of our own actions.
Give me then your reading as the ANC of the levels of tribalism and possibly even racism in your organization. Would you say it exists to any extent?
Well, it is not even ideal or desirable for the ANC to even promote. That's why the ANC...
But does it exist?
Actually, one of the things that... well, where you would have instances of tribalism and where we become aware of those, we immediately act to address that. For instance, we've even ensured that, and one of this point the DSG makes in an address, that you cannot have even municipalities that are constructed along ethnic lines. It doesn't help. It perpetuates divisions. Remember how the homelands were formed in the past, where Pedi people would stay in Leboa, Tsonga-speaking people would stay in Gazankulu, Venda-speaking people would stay in Venda. This was now the case in what was called the Northern Transvaal, where you had you had what is now today one province, but with about 3 homelands of Pedi-speaking people. Actually, in the community where I come from, of Palabura, there, back in the days, people would be divided with a street. You know that in this side of the township, it's Pedi-speaking people. In this other side of the township, it's Tsonga-speaking people. What the ANC has always been doing was to make sure that we create a culture where our people could coexist. Actually, the 1969...
So you say you've worked to create a culture where people can coexist, but the reality is in South Africa, we talk a lot about the racial divisions between black and white, but
yes,
there are pockets of this country where the black South Africans and people who identify as coloured are not getting along. You see it, for example, I remember in Gauteng, there was a dispute over the issue of school placements, for example. You go to parts of the Western Cape, yes, you're not in government there, but it comes up as well. So would you say that you as the ANC have dealt with those sensitivities as well as you should, given that, as Jessie Duarte made the point at the weekend, it is to an extent inaccurate to say that the coloured communities in South Africa did not suffer or benefited under apartheid?
Well, actually, the DSG is correct to the extent that she's speaking about the challenges that exist and the fact that she has placed on the national agenda this important issue as a conversation that all of us must reflect upon. Of course, there are challenges. There are still areas where our people can't coexist, even where they are blacks themselves. There are still those that see themselves as superior than others. Now, we can only say that we have achieved in uniting our people when such things do not really exist. I mean, look at the latest report that came out of Stats SA. Actually, the president was speaking about this yesterday in Lepalale, addressing members of the African National Congress. That what that report begins to demonstrate is the kind of inequalities that we have. Now, we have got to make sure that we deal with the racial polarization, we deal with inequalities that are there, we achieve parity, and all of this we can also do through affirmative actions. There's always been an agenda since 1994 to make sure that we create a country where our people could be able to coexist as one.
I'm glad you bring up the president, because he's again published the Monday newsletter, the weekly newsletter that comes from the presidency, and in it he criticizes the private sector for the slow pace of transformation. Some would say there actually isn't any transformation at all in various parts of the private sector. Others watching this interview now, listening to our conversation, will say that's very rich coming from the leader of a party that has so far failed to come down strongly on companies that are failing to move in line, in step with the transformation agenda.
Well, we are not going to shy away from speaking about transformation. We ought to be seen talking about it. We've got to even challenge captains of industry, the private sector as well, and make sure that they too drive transformative policies. When we look at the private sector in totality, especially companies that are listed on the stock exchange, who are supposed to be saying the people of South Africa are equally represented in these institutions that are meant to drive our own economy. It cannot be that the best work that Africans, especially black people in this country, the best of works that they could do is to be CEOs of SOEs or to become director generals. They too must become real captains of industry. They must go and be CEOs of listed companies, so that they could be able to use the muscle, the balance sheet of those companies to drive the kind of a development we want. We are not going to stop this conversation.
But do you concede that as the party that holds the governing power in this country, you have failed to hold the private sector to account on these transformation goals, and that is why they continue to do as they please?
Well, the fact that these issues are being raised and the fact that the President of the Republic has put this on the table now begins to show you that we are not shy. We might not have moved as fast as we would have expected to. But the fact that we are raising these things...
But you're raising the obvious, Pule, are you not? Because many South Africans will say what the President has pointed out today, that the private sector remains a largely hostile place for black employees where you are ignored, overlooked, underpaid. So why do you want to be congratulated for stating the obvious instead of bringing about action against these companies?
It is important that when you start that conversation, the end goal is to then begin putting forward measures that ensures that some monitoring takes place. There's got to be actions taken against those companies that are knowingly undermining the very prescripts of transformation that we're talking about. This is not just a talk shop. We've got the responsibility to make sure that the things that we say also find expression in policy. We have introduced a lot of transformative legislation, whether it's BEE, making sure that black people could be able to participate in the economy, not as tokens, but as real players in industry.
Why should the black majority continue to trust an ANC that has so far failed to wage the transformation war at a satisfactory pace?
Well, it is, you see, trust has got to be earned, and that trust has got to be earned and enjoyed through our own actions. Well, from time to time, we ought to reflect where there are challenges, where we are not doing enough, then say what are the things that need to be done. You see, but we are not going to go out there and say, if we failed in this area, we do not have a program that must deal with our failures. Then why should we be declaring on ourselves the mantle of being leaders of society if we can't deal with our challenges decisively in that way?
Pule Mabe, it is your job to spin, and you have spun, but thank you so much for coming on to Nightline tonight. We're out of time.
I'm reflecting
We
on
will
reality.
bring you back for another conversation, I'm sure, but that was the ANC's national spokesperson, Pule Mabe, speaking to us tonight about those various issues.